Hello, I'm Teresa Clark. I'm the chairman and CEO of Africa.com and am very privileged to be a part of the Africa Investors Conference. This plenary session is focusing on the opportunities for digital innovation in Africa. And in particular, we are joined by two fantastic panelists today. We have Victor Williams, who is the head of corporate and investment banking for the Africa's region of Standard Bank. Thank you for joining us, Victor. Okay. And then secondly, we have Mark Chaban, who's the general manager and CTO for the Middle East and Africa region of Microsoft. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Teresa. Good to be here.
Wonderful. So the COVID-19 pandemic has created a huge digital shift worldwide, with people using digital channels far more than ever before in their personal and professional lives. In Africa, there's been an appetite for digital solutions, and in many instances, we've seen African technology leapfrog innovations of the rest of the world. And so in this fireside chat, we're going to be exploring the opportunities and challenges that exist in getting more digital solutions to be used across Africa. There's no doubt that this has been a tremendous moment. There's a meme that has run around the internet asking this question, who has been responsible for digital transformation in your company over the last 3 months? Who has been responsible for making that rapid advancement? Has it been your chief digital officer, your chief innovation officer, your chief technology officer, the CEO, or COVID-19? And of course, we know that COVID-19 has been responsible for forcing industries and organizations to make huge advances. So that's really what we're going to be talking about, trying to understand which of those advances have taken place the most in Africa and which of those are going to remain a part of the permanent landscape. So let me start by asking both Victor and Mark to just say a little bit more about their background and introduce themselves beyond the titles that I gave them. Victor, would you like to just say a little bit about the work that you do as the head of corporate investment banking for Standard Bank in the Africa's region?
Thank you, Teresa. So in my role as head of corporate investment banking for Africa regions, I oversee Standard Bank's operations with corporate, institutional, and sovereign clients across the 19 markets in sub-Saharan Africa in which we're present outside of South Africa.
Great. Thank you, Victor. And Mark?
Thank you, Teresa. So Mark Chaban, I'm actually the Chief Technology Officer based in Dubai, responsible for our Middle East and Africa region. I've been with Microsoft going now on 17 years and proudly been serving Africa in multiple different industries. Specifically, my last role was in education, so did a lot of work in education in Africa, and happy to be with you all today.
Great. So Victor, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about this conference. This has been a very significant conference over the last decade. It's always taken place at Standard Bank's offices in London. Clearly, conferences across the board have been canceled this year. Can you talk a little bit about Standard Bank's experience and decision making in deciding to take this particular event digital?
Thank you, Teresa. So as you mentioned, this is our 10th year of hosting this conference. Over the last 9 years, we've met about this time of the year in London at our great offices there. And it's been a fantastic platform for us to bring together our corporate clients, African policymakers, and institutional investors who are very interested in investing in African equities and bond instruments together to facilitate great conversation, build relationships, and to lay the foundation for continued investment flow into the continent. This year, with the impact of COVID, it became clear that we were not going to be able to hold the conference physically. But as we met earlier in the year to talk about what we were going to do, we realized that it was critically important that we continue to create a platform for our corporate clients and policymakers to meet with investors. In fact, in some ways, it's even more important this year because many of the investors have not been able to travel to the continent. They don't have the same feel for what's happening with the companies and with the countries that they usually have And we thought that bringing the various stakeholders together was critical to inform decision making during this crisis and beyond. And so once we made that decision, it really became a question of how to make the conference happen. And we quickly decided to have it virtually. We've never done something like this before. And we're thrilled to be able to partner with Microsoft and to use their platforms to help us facilitate what has been a very effective conference so far in a very secure way for all of our stakeholders. We've actually seen more participation in this conference than we've had last year, both in terms of the number of investors, which is up by 70%, and the number of corporates who are participating, which is up 17%.
Great. Victor, I'm going to stay with you for just a minute. We're talking about Standard Bank's conference, but you're in a service business and you service clients straight across the continent of Africa, across all sectors. And I'd like to ask you what you're seeing with your clients in this same regard, now that Standard Bank has taken this step in moving its conference online. Can you just comment with some anecdotes or observations about what you've seen amongst your clients? How are they adapting to the new digital environment, and what are they doing in the same regard?
So, thank you, Teresa. I think the first thing we've seen across many of our clients is obviously the shifting to a place where they can conduct their business using digital means. And so the advent of whether it's Microsoft Teams or other platforms, and the usage of that has grown significantly. And I think we're all finding that our companies and clients have been able to scale up their technology to facilitate ongoing work in their companies in a way that actually many of them did not think they would not have anticipated. And so that part, I think, has worked out really well. I think the second piece that we're seeing is companies starting to evolve their offerings in order to meet the new realities. Obviously, clients and their customers cannot interact in the same ways they used to. And so we're seeing examples of our clients looking to touch their customers through virtual means. The amount of engagement generally seems to have gone up across the board. And I think that especially in the financial services sector, we're seeing the ability to serve clients digitally and to provide end-to-end services through technology platforms much more extensively than we had seen before.
Right. Mark, I'm going to come back over to you now. You are also in the service industry, servicing hundreds or thousands of clients across the continent. Can you share some observations on what you've been seeing with your client base in terms of how they're adapting?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa, and thank you for allowing us to be part of the AIC 2020 conference. Microsoft's definitely honored to be partnering with Standard Bank, and I want to thank the event organizers for hosting this event over Teams this year, which I'm really happy about. Now, to answer your question on digital, I'd say first and foremost, security, privacy, and trust are the critical aspects that we are trying to address in the services, to your point, Teresa, in terms of events. How can we ensure that events like this can happen in a secure way? And essentially, what we're seeing in Middle East and Africa now is a lot of our customers move into remote everything model. And as the customer priority in EMEA has shifted ever since the pandemic has started, it's been really around three themes. First and foremost is business continuity. Then the second is how do they enable a digital presence? And then third is how can they ensure that they drive the cost optimization that's required? And new scenarios are being developed very, very fast and very, very quickly. So for example, many health institutions now in Middle East and Africa are actually enabling doctors and nurses to do essential consultations online with patients. This was never the case pre-COVID. In the FSI space, and with Standard Bank and many other banks, we've seen them accelerate the transformation around automating business processes. So we have something that we call Power Platform, which is a great way from a low code or no code way to actually automate a broken process or fix and accelerate business processes. So we're using the learnings from an accelerated way from financial services to also help retail, healthcare, government in terms of how do they quickly can automate those manual or slow processes. And I would say the second key piece that's becoming more and more essential is how do we partner with these organizations, whether they're government or non-government, to ensure that we're putting in place the right skilling programs to accelerate the digital capabilities of their employees. That has been accelerated tremendously, and we're so happy to be a partner on that journey.
Good. And let me just make a note for the audience here that you can send any questions you have through the Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of the screen, the question mark inside of the bubble. And please send in questions. We'll be happy to present them to our panelists. So carrying on with the conversation, let's talk a little bit about Africa specifically, because so far the conversation that we're having, could speak to the world, the globe. Everybody has been changing, but let's talk about specifically what we're seeing in Africa. We know that there are some last mile issues in Africa, and so the way in which certain parts of the world in the West, in Europe, and the US have been able to adapt haven't seen quite the same type of adaptation in Africa because of some of the greater obstacles to connectivity. Mark, do you want to comment on that and talk about what you're seeing in Africa compared to what your colleagues might be seeing elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Just taking a second to unmute. So absolutely, last mile connectivity is a core issue, especially throughout the continent. I want to just start by saying, maybe just share with our audience that in 2013, more than 7 years ago, Microsoft launched something that we call the For Africa initiative. And that initiative was all really about making sure that we're investing very early on in startups and partners, small and medium businesses, governments, and more importantly, youth on the African continent. Part of that program, and a big tenet of that program, Teresa, has been something we call as delivering affordable access. And as part of delivering affordable internet access, we want to make sure that we're also developing a skilled workforce and investing in local technology solutions. On the last mile connectivity, to your point, we focused a lot of the efforts into really kind of like, I would say, 3 areas. Number one is how do you build the right infrastructure to make sure that we are really bringing these digital services to the continent. And I can proudly share that we were the first hyperscale company to bring our data centers into the region, having launched multiple data centers in South Africa, which is really, really exciting. And we're also started leveraging in the past 7 years technology that came out of Microsoft Research, something we call TV white spaces, which allows us to actually bring broadband access to many different countries, and it's been deployed now in many different countries throughout Africa, for example, like in Kenya. So building infrastructure is step one as part of our For Africa work, building out the skills development and ensuring that we've got the right trainings for the citizens and for the youth. And most importantly, building a trusted ecosystem to ensure that we're addressing issues such as, again, cybersecurity. And most importantly now, how do we help address the ethical use cases of implementations like artificial intelligence? Now, this is kind of like maybe a historical quick view, Teresa. What I'm really proud of beyond the data center investments and beyond the TV white spaces investments is just last year, we've actually brought the product group engineering teams to be based in Africa. And we opened last year something we call that Microsoft Africa Development Centers, and which is basically a premier center of engineering for Microsoft, where we can actually have world-class African talent that can create solutions for the local market as well as global impact. We are currently in fully operational mode in 2 sites in Nairobi, Kenya, as well as in Lagos, Nigeria. And the goal is to staff 500 deep engineers who are actually helping build the next generation of Microsoft products, which is really, really amazing in terms of making sure that we are not only addressing the local needs, but also making sure that we can create a bigger impact from a global scale.
Great. And Victor, I'd like to talk to you about this same topic. Let's talk, I know that Standard Bank does a lot of infrastructure, you structure a lot of infrastructure investment across the continent. Certainly you're very engaged in digital platforms, And Africa's connectivity is an important consideration in Standard Bank's overall business. So can you comment a little bit about this last mile issue and what you're seeing from your vantage point?
So thanks, Teresa. I mean, I think from our vantage point, what we're seeing is, I mean, maybe starting with the formal sector first, is obviously an uptake in the use of mobile platforms, which really supports the investment case behind telecoms and the building out of infrastructure. And I think investors continue to realize that this is an ongoing need in Africa and will continue to provide significant opportunities going forward. We've seen one of our clients, Helios Towers, have a successful raising of capital recently, which I think speaks to this investment thesis around building out telecommunications infrastructure in Africa. We've seen, and I think this is now probably across the whole population, a real drive around mobile money payments. One of our clients in the last couple of days was talking about a significant increase in the usage of the mobile money platforms that they've seen. And as people have tried to deal with social distancing or physical distancing, there's also been a drive to move away from physical cash as a medium of exchange. And so mobile money and e-wallets have become increasingly important. Earlier today in one of the plenary sessions, one of the Kenyan policymakers gave an example of how the government of Kenya is using the M-Pesa platform to push support payments to the informal sector. And given that platform has a 70% coverage in Kenya, it actually reaches many more people than the formal banking sector does. And so the use of mobile money, which is a true innovation on the African continent, I think has come to the fore during this crisis. So those are some of what we're seeing. In general, I think every kind of digital capacity is more in demand and will present opportunities going forward than we've had before. And in particular, I think there exists an opportunity for the corporate sector to work with governments to continuously overcome some of the obstacles that have hindered the growth of digital technologies on the African continent. One of those that comes to mind is the issue of the cost of data. And maybe this is a time to look at innovative ways to reduce the cost of data, because that and the cost of smartphone and device platforms continues to be a real hindrance for many Africans in moving to digital technology.
That's great. Victor, let me follow up with another question, and it's my question. I'm also going to tie it with a question that's just come in from Seki Mutukwa of the Ashmore Group. Clearly, the participants in this conference have always found great value because you bring regulators to the table, and it helps global investors understand where the investment opportunities are based on friendly regulation. And as we talk about digital migration, Seki Mutukwa wants to know, what countries specifically would you say have particularly supportive regulations when it comes to digital migration? And so I know that you've mentioned Kenya, and Kenya is a very regulatorily friendly place given the success of M-Pesa. Can you speak to the regulatory environment of other countries that you think are very attractive from an investment standpoint?
Thanks, Teresa. I don't always like to pick and choose amongst regulators who I work with, but I guess I'll highlight just a few examples. I mean, I think Kenya, again, goes without saying, a very supportive environment for digital innovation and for that interplay between, especially on the fintech side, in terms of M-Pesa and other platforms. In Nigeria, we've seen, I think in the last year, a drive to create a more constructive environment for payment services companies to come into the market. Many of them have been wanting to operate in that market, largely they've had to work with the banking sector as partners, and I think the Nigerian government has created more of a regulatory window, so to speak, for those players to come into the market and to operate and to bring some of their innovation to bear for Nigerians. I think that on the other hand, we've seen in some places where there are taxes being imposed on digital transactions and on digital activity, generally speaking. That's not supportive, broadly speaking. And as an organization, one of the things we've noticed in terms of business activity is for there to be supportive regulation in terms of assisting and enabling, for example, the use of digital documents to conclude transactions, to support cloud-based technology, etc. And I think across the board, many African countries still need to make progress on those fronts.
Good. Let's go down sector specific. We're here talking about digital change that has occurred as a result of COVID-19. One of the sectors that has been impacted globally has been education, with schools shutting down and all learning going on to e-learning platforms. Now, we understand that this has been adopted across the continent in a fairly uneven fashion. Some places and some institutions and some communities have done better than others. Mark, do you want to comment about this and tell us what you're seeing in terms of the adoption of e-learning across the continent, and please help us understand what constraints there are and what needs to happen so that it's more successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I love the topic of education. Spent a very long time in Africa working in education across many of the different countries and sectors. Look, first and foremost, I want to make sure that the audience is aware of the fact that our Office 365 solutions that we basically are making available today for Standard Bank or for many of the commercial entities are available for free for education institutions, specifically teams. It's available for free for all education institutions that want to set up teachers, students, and administrators to actually be enabled on this platform. And specifically, in collaboration with a lot of our partners in Africa, we are offering free Teams trainings to teachers to ensure that teachers are actually who've become now central IT, if you want to call it that, to make sure that they're aware of how to run a digital lesson effectively and over the Teams as a platform to all of their learners, and they can make sure that you're keeping the learners engaged on an immersive platform. And what makes me really happy is just a great example of just what was just announced this week in South Africa. Our team and our managing director, Lillian in South Africa, basically worked very closely with Vodacom and Vodacom Business to enable a connected digital learning platform for education institutions, which really basically now touches the institution, the educator, as well as all of the learners in South Africa. And basically what this partnership with Vodacom did is, it's basically the connected digital education platform is what we call it, and it combines essentially the tools and applications from a platform perspective, being Teams and Office and so on, all in a single package bundled to enable digital learning in a virtual kind of classroom. So now the students can actually submit assignments, they can do their assessments, educators can return the marked assignments very quickly using technologies like OneNote. And this is not only helping save time, but it's also ensuring that the resources are all in one single place. So it makes me really proud to see us continue to have an impact like this on educators and learners. And in this Vodacom offering, it's just one small example that we're making available as part of to your earlier question, Teresa, as affordable connectivity packages. And it's also because of the short-term need related to, as you know, worldwide and specifically here within Middle East and Africa with the school closures. So it's allowing us to also accelerate and maybe leapfrog what would have taken a very long time to enable digital learning in a school system to now to be much more accelerated and, more importantly, made affordable for students to actually have access to. We've done programs like this all throughout the continent, but the latest one that was just announced this week with Vodacom has just been really exciting, and the take up for that has been just really awesome.
Zomar, let's talk a little bit more broadly about what we're seeing in the education sector in Africa, and let's talk about just the fact that there's some that may have the benefit of accessing your products, and there are a lot that don't have that. And so let's just talk about the entire continent, and if you can please give us some observations as to what you think is working well and what you think still requires some solutions, because clearly there are a lot of students in Africa who have missed out as a result of the pandemic, the inability to go to school, physical school. I think Africa is getting far from other regions of the world. And so what do you see as systemic in solving these problems across the African continent?
Sure. Thanks, Teresa. Happy to expand a little bit more on the education question. First and foremost, I want to just share a little bit of insight. We used to have a few million users of Teams on a monthly basis. Now we're at a point of 75 million users of Teams on a daily basis. The usage has just been incredible. Now, touching on the education and the heart of education. I would say we more than 183,000 different education institutions are now relying on Teams, and it's really amazing when you think about the kind of platform this is actually enabling for the collaboration between the students and the teachers, and more importantly, specifically for the African continent, where we haven't been able to scale, let's say, the Vodacom great kind of scenario that I discussed for South Africa. We relied on the TV white spaces solution that I mentioned earlier, which came out of Microsoft Research, which allows us to deploy connectivity in sub-Saharan Africa to also enable the connectivity in those locations. Now, let's take an extreme scenario is basically, I think, what you're touching on, Teresa, which is no access whatsoever. The beauty of our solutions continues to be is that we continue to offer them in a hybrid way, meaning that if a financial institution wants to run data sovereign, completely disconnected scenarios, well, Microsoft's been doing that for the past 40 years of our history. We still enable that to allow them to have the data sovereign disconnected access from the cloud. And the same thing applies for education. Most of the scenarios that I'm highlighting, whether it's OneNote in the classroom for a student or specifically, or Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, still allow for students to actually have that in a disconnected format, so that student can leave the school, go home, do their assignment, and then when they return to the school where there's internet connectivity, immediately those are synced to the teacher, and then that kind of online digital experience takes effect. So very proud of the fact that our solutions work in a hybrid way and allow both our commercial customers from a financial services perspective to have the sovereignty they want, and as well as our education institutions that still don't have the access that they require to have an online digital system.
Thank you. Victor, I'm going to come back to you. I know that you've been involved in a lot of innovation on the continent, and in particular, I think a fair bit of innovation in the agricultural sector, which I imagine is accelerating during this time. Would you like to share with us some examples of what you're seeing across the continent in the ag sector innovation space?
Thanks, Teresa. We're doing some interesting work in East Africa, where we are looking to help our clients, and that's at the corporate level, at the what we would call the business banking or commercial level, and at the more towards the retail end, who sit in an agricultural value chain, work more efficiently together. So we're working, for example, in one of the brewery company value chains, and where they are looking to source some grain, sorghum, and grains like that from the local market, and that comes from the farm and goes through co-ops to aggregators, and then eventually to processors, and then onto the brewing company. And so what we are doing there is using, we have a team that's working on building a technology platform that all the various stakeholders can participate in, that allows them to share information on what's being planted, what the expected yields are going to be. It allows them to understand how much supply there is in the value chain, to track its progress as it moves from the farm to the brewery. We're bringing in other providers of agricultural inputs, such as fertilizers and seeds, making them part of that ecosystem. It's allowing us to be more targeted in how we supply support to various players in the ecosystem. We're gaining much better information, which then allows us to make better risk decisions to various players in the ecosystem. And the impact that we're seeing in the early pilots is a significant growth in yields, which is ultimately what you want to see in a way that then puts much more money in the pockets of the farming communities, while assuring the corporate end customer of a robust supply for their products.
Very good. I'm going to take another question that has come in over the transom, and I'm going to give it to you, Victor. And one of the questions is, how does the bank balance flexibility and innovation against security? For example, I don't know if this is a question that is right for you, but I'll give it to you, and maybe Mark will chime in because I know he does a lot of work at the bank. But I want to see if you can just chat a little bit about any sense that you have about balancing innovation and security, like using multiple cloud providers, or how do you think about that?
Thanks, Teresa. Interesting question. I think for us as a financial institution, we think we have to deliver both. So on the one hand, we need to be at the forefront of helping to advance the use of digital financial solutions on the African continent. And we don't always do this on our own. We do a lot of it in partnership with fintechs and other players. And increasingly, we want to buy and integrate rather than build internally. At the same time, we have an obligation to our customers and our clients to always be giving them a very secure platform. And so internally, we talk about being always on, which speaks to the resilience of our platforms and their stability, and always secure, which means that at all times, the platform we're using has to provide the right levels of cybersecurity for our clients. And so for us, it's not an either or. We want to deliver both advances in our use of technology while at the same time being secure. In fact, if I take the example of this conference, one of the reasons why we chose Microsoft Teams was because of security. There were other platforms that are available that could have delivered a lot of what we are doing. But Microsoft Teams stood out for us in terms of security, and we didn't want to compromise that in any way, given the caliber of clients on the corporate and policymaker and investor side that we have in this conference.
Well, very well said for the head of corporate and investment banking, Victor. You have a wide range of knowledge. You've impressed me, your ability to address that question. So let's move on to the next one then. Just thinking about what the
Teresa, do you mind if I just add maybe 2 points to that answer from Victor, because I think he said it well, but I maybe want to just highlight maybe one thing, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thanks a lot. Look, I would say, as we kind of, we call this the respond, recover and then reimagine phases in terms of what we've seen in the COVID crisis. And I would say now, as we're moving from recover to basically reimagine, we see a lot of the financial institutions deploying data, kind of moving to say, hey, security is now top of mind for me. And they're deploying data sensitive applications to basically places where they never thought they wanted to do it in this remote everything world that we're in today. And so because this is moving at an accelerated pace, we're seeing these kind of what we call latency sensitive, so the timing and the latency of the application is very sensitive, as well as the data sovereignty becoming a really, really big deal for a lot of our African customers. So yes, I'm proud to share that we have data centers in South Africa. But for the rest of our African customers, what we've been doing there is we've actually have a subset of our data center. We call it's basically in our hybrid offering that I mentioned earlier, and allows a lot of those customers to now run those, let's say, mission critical applications, as well as let's say microservices, or something that we call kind of like, cutting edge technologies, disconnected if they wanted to, in their own kind of hybrid or sovereign data center. So this is actually allowing us to address a lot of the customer needs as they look to recover. We see it like it's playing a really good critical role in terms of accelerating their digital presence, but at the same time allowing them to run in a hybrid way if they wanted to. I also see them. I see us now also partnering with them around how do you reimagine some of the processes that they have, in making sure that we actually integrate artificial intelligence in those processes to make sure that they are a lot more effective in terms of the way they are deployed. I'm seeing that as more and more technologies that will continue to emerge. And just one last one, I would say it's also really exciting on the scaling piece. A lot of customers are saying, hey, you know what? I don't want 2-3 different cloud vendors. I need one, and I need it to be data sovereign. I need it to be disconnected, but I also need it to be online when I need it. So help me in that way in terms of training my staff so they're fully capable, instead of training multiple different staffs on multiple different technologies. We're seeing, again, a really big kind of consolidation that way in this new world of AI assisted, automated, kind of remote everything. I hope that helps.
Right. Victor, let's come back and think about, we're talking to your investors, and they're wanting to learn from your broad experience across the continent, serving clients in all regions and all sectors, and in particular thinking about innovation. For global investors interested in investing in innovation across the continent, we've talked a little bit about regulation, and you've given some very insightful observations as to where you think the regulatory environment supports investment. Can you comment a little bit further about how you would be advising your global investor clients who are thinking about investing in innovation? What is a good way to think about this as you approach the continent from either a sector perspective or other vehicle or path towards getting exposure to industries and companies that will benefit from innovation and technological advancement? What would you tell the investors in this regard?
Wow. Thanks, Teresa. I think I would start off by saying that innovation is, first of all, everywhere on the African continent in pretty much every sector in which we operate. So it's quite clear that there's a lot happening in telecoms and a lot happening around payments. So those are obvious places to go. I think this continent is it may be the leading continent in the world in terms of digital payments and the move towards cashless transactions, in terms of how that is being innovated both at an industry level within the banking sector, but also through fintechs. I think that there's a lot of opportunity that's starting to show up in supply chains. So some of the more interesting work that we've seen is in the logistics sector, and using various apps and platforms to do a better job of tracking where goods are as they travel across the African continent, what's happening with trucks, and locating their exact physical location on the continent, dealing with the issue of crossing borders and trying to make that process more digitized so that trucks can go across borders more quickly. There's starting to be a lot of work in the trade finance area, broadly speaking, and the use of blockchain technologies to secure transactions and to provide assurance to buyer and seller in that process, as well as intermediaries. There continues to be a lot of innovation in the healthcare sector. Some interesting work has been done on the continent in terms of pharmaceuticals and their security, and making using codes and QR codes to allow a consumer to be assured that a pharmaceutical is genuine and not fake and hasn't been tampered with. There's a lot of work going on in education, and Mark spoke to some of it there, but the rise of e-learning platforms and distance learning platforms had started to emerge on the continent even prior to COVID. I would expect that that's going to continue increasing over time. And then I think from a digitization perspective, meaning looking, I think there's a lot of opportunity to take existing processes that were more manual and to digitize them. And so across many sectors, I think we're going to see corporations and companies do a lot of work that helps to reduce their cost to serve, while at the same time we'll see a lot of innovation, both within corporations as well as innovative new players that helps to create new markets and brings new services to the fore.
Good. And to the last point that you make about bringing new services to the fore, as we speak about Africa, we know that one of the both opportunities and challenges for the continent is the youth dividend. The need to engage youth, the need to find employment for youth, and the fact that digitization has taken a big leap in these last many months. Can you talk a little bit about how you think that the new age of innovation and the fact that Africa has leapt forward along with the rest of the world towards a more digital context, how do you think that's going to impact youth employment and this challenge/opportunity going forward with respect to young people?
Thanks, Teresa. It's a very interesting question, and obviously digitization is only one way we're going to deal with this challenge of youth unemployment and youth opportunity. There are many interventions that are required, but speaking about this one of the interesting things, I mean, over the last 3 months, we've all been stuck at home, and I think we've all spent more time on webinars and in digital conferences than we ever thought we would. But I've been really interested to see a number of platforms emerge where that are specifically youth-oriented, where young entrepreneurs are pitching their ideas to potential investors who are then having, sort of like a Dragon's Den kind of session to question the young investors and to support them with funding. I think that is one opportunity that has emerged here, and in general, I think I've seen the emergence of other platforms as well. So, for example, I was reading something recently about Facebook that has started a platform to support young African female entrepreneurs and to provide them with the ability to go online and to set up stores, online stores to sell their goods. At Standard Bank, we also have a platform which we're rolling out in South Africa that allows young people to go online and set up online commerce capabilities. So I think there are a number of interventions that are ongoing, and what's really required is more attention, more funding, and ultimately more access for these entrepreneurs to networks and markets that will allow them to grow. Great,
that's great. Let's talk about Africa as a place for all of that innovation. Mark, I don't know whether you have any observations from your side as to ways in which you think Africa is leading the world, interestingly, with any kind of innovation.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. So yeah, I mean, look, I think the COVID situation has spurred a lot of innovation. And most recently, our CTO Satya basically mentioned in a Q2 earnings call, he basically said that, hey, we have seen 2 years worth of innovation taking place worldwide in just in the past 2 months. So it's been incredible. And I would say in Africa specifically, what we see is we're engaging with our massive partner ecosystem is the fact that throughout many different sectors, pretty big innovations happening. So for example, in healthcare, and specifically in South Africa, and I'll mention some of those partners like the Mint Group and Fulukisa, they developed COVID AI, which was really revolutionary in terms of the way we were screening and testing for an entire population to help curb the spread of COVID-19 through data intelligence and our citizen platform. I kind of mentioned this earlier, it's called Power Platform. And the reason why we call it citizen platform is because anybody can actually go and develop a quick app. We call it the no code, low code kind of approach. But that was a really quick way with really young talent and our massive ecosystem from a partner perspective to help quickly be able to respond to the market needs and help make sure that we address some of the kind of the pandemic related scenarios. We're also seeing really interestingly the emergence of virtual courtrooms, click and collect applications for retail and remote maintenance and manufacturing. So a lot of really amazing scenarios, again, fueled by our partner ecosystems that are supported for us, at least from the For Africa initiative work that we do. We're also seeing a big change in the way customers are deploying our technology. So a lot of them are moving from this massive, large investment where you have to procure the software and hire the talent and go and deploy it to a more of a waterfall style product deployment method that's basically a lot more agile, a lot more sprint-like in terms of fashion. So I deploy, this small product portfolio. It gives me this really early return. And again, that's the beauty of our cloud offerings, is that it allows us to basically offset a lot of that, let's say, big bulk kind of upfront purchases that customers used to have to do. And then maybe last, and I would just mention, Teresa, this African development centers that we just invested in that I talked a little bit earlier about the 2 locations with Kenya and Nigeria. I mean, these are unlike any other investments that any other global technology company's done. And I'm especially proud about it because we expect the financial investment to total more than $100 million, which is just amazing in terms of the market opportunity that this presents for us to develop better solutions by hiring African engineers from Africa, specifically to make sure that we can actually build not only the better solutions that are a lot more inclusive, but more importantly, expand on our partner ecosystem to make sure that we are using the partners throughout the continent to basically help fuel the innovation and the digital transformation. And we have a big partner team inside the company that's solely focused around helping kind of support and stimulate and train the partner ecosystem to ensure that they are able to then basically help customers realize the value of the cloud, the cost offerings of the cloud, and making sure that then they can actually have access to those digital tools in a very, very quick way.
Okay, great. Another question for you, Mark, that's coming in over the line. Outside Microsoft products, what skills do you think that Africa needs in order to help upskill young people and employees to be able to function in the new world?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, very critical. I think that's just to make sure I can highlight this. That is the second, probably biggest investment that we're making in general as a company, but more importantly, through our For Africa work. So from a skills development perspective, our work is really around addressing the skills gap from basic digital literacy to deep technical skills. So I would kind of break it up into those 3 chunks. And for example, again, in South Africa, we partnered with Gauteng provincial government to launch a digital skilling program that enables, again, very quick access to basic literary skills, digital skills. We've also rolled out a program that we have that's available in Middle East and Africa, specifically built by us for Middle East and Africa, called the Cloud Society. This is now available all across the continent, and it basically offers free access to technical online training and certification opportunities to ensure that people can actually very quickly have access to those digital skills. And one last one that I would say that's become really, really popular, we have that we've made available, again, freely online, is the Artificial Intelligence Business School. So we call it the AI Business School. and pretty amazing content in terms of allowing somebody to have basic knowledge around artificial intelligence, to low code kind of no code approach to artificial intelligence, to all the way deep kind of technical skills to be able to design and build cognitive services on AI. And definitely, I would say we would love to see more and more, folks actually taking advantage of those platforms, and specifically that certification platform to help ensure that people can actually, get certified, get the knowledge, and ensure that they are building, AI-infused solutions for the future.
Okay. Victor, I'm back to you for a moment. One of the things when we talk about advancing Africa, we know that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a really important platform that many people have sort of attached to in terms of thinking that the continent is going to be able to achieve a lot of important growth objectives. And so now when we overlay digital onto the African Free Trade Agreement, I understand that at the same time that countries are becoming a little bit more protectionist because they're worried about people bringing the virus across their borders. How do you see digital and innovation playing a role and where the African Free Trade Agreement is going?
Thanks, Teresa. So look, I think first of all, at Standard Bank, we are big supporters of the drive towards building a continental free trade area on the continent and making it operate more effectively, in effect creating a much larger market for Africa's goods and services. Obviously, in light of COVID, it's not surprising that the implementation of AFCFTA has been pushed back, both because I think there's still a fair amount of preparatory work that needs to get done, but also at this time, we're seeing more examples of borders being closed than borders being opened. But in the medium to long term, this is still an important initiative for the continent. And the way we look at it is that there is an opportunity for digitization to help facilitate many aspects of the AFCFTA. So one would be, as I said before, just using digitizing trade and the use of and digitizing documentary trade in particular, and using technologies like blockchain that could help with smart contracting to make transactions go a lot faster. There's a lot of room for digitizing logistics, as I said earlier, to facilitate the physical flow of goods across borders. The stories, I think we're all familiar that when goods are being shipped into Africa from Asia, for example, they take more time to go from, say, Mombasa to Kampala than they took to come from Mumbai to Mombasa. So digitization can play a big role in helping to improve the logistics supply chain. In the trading services, we see a lot of room for digitization of transactions. And so this goes back to a point I raised earlier about governments facilitating the use of documents, electronic signatures, digital transactions in order to facilitate commerce. We need to have a much better framework for sharing data across the continent. That has to be part of AFCFTA as well. And so what we're seeing in some instances is governments becoming very focused on the data pertaining to their country staying in their country. And while there is an important element around data privacy and data security that needs to be paid attention to, but under the right circumstances, we need a freer sharing of data in order to facilitate the trade in services. So I think digitization, there needs to be a digitization. There needs to be a digitization agenda, that goes alongside the general progression of the AFCFTA, and that is a key part of what needs to be done in addition to the facilitating the flow of physical goods.
That's great. Well, I think that we've come to the pretty much the end of our session here. I want to thank both Victor and Mark for their tremendous insights on these topics that we've talked about in digitization and the technical trends that we're going to see going forward. One survey globally said that 75% of consumers who have used a digital platform for the first time during COVID-19 believe that they will continue to use it on a permanent basis. And as a result, we've seen a huge shift from the past to the future, and no part of the world, no region has more to gain in terms of upside from digitization than the African continent, where digitization provides elements of democratization, providing access in education and healthcare to things, to resources that are scarce. I'm going to ask each of you just to close for one moment by telling us, for people interested in digitization in Africa, what is the one piece of advice that you would give investors as they think about investing in Africa in the digital/innovation space? I'll give you just a second to think about that, and I'll just make one further remark. And that is that the changes that we're seeing are happening across the sectors that are important from a social perspective in healthcare and in education, but they're also quite important from a commercial standpoint. We're seeing changes in retail, we're seeing changes in banking, we're seeing changes in government and how government responds. And so as a result, we know that Africa has shown that it can leapfrog in the past, and there are many people with keen eyes on Africa to understand how Africa is going to leapfrog as things, quote, go back to normal. And so it's been a very exciting opportunity to hear how these two giants, Standard Bank and Microsoft, are approaching this on the continent and working together. So with that, I'm going to turn to each of you and let you guys get the last word. So Mark, would you like to tell us what would your one piece of advice be for investors who are thinking about investing in digital/innovation on the continent?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Teresa. I would say, first and foremost, invest in your staff, invest in your employees. Skilling right now has become kind of a core mission to a lot of what our customers are asking for. So some of the things that I mentioned related to the Artificial Intelligence Business School that's available on Microsoft.com/AI is a great platform to start. Other things related to the Cloud Society program that's available in terms of making sure you invest in your employees that way is great. And then number two, invest in the security and the compliance way, because it's, staying compliant is something that we're proud to be helping customers do. As customers expand their systems to work from home and remote for everything, that's becoming a bigger issue. So in that space, we're actually making really big investments, and we're happy to partner with you along the way.
Great. And Victor?
Thanks, Teresa. I'm going to ask your permission to make 2 points. So the first one is that
Victor.
So the first one would be, especially for our clients who are at this conference, as they speak to companies in whom they're looking to invest, it's important to ask them about what their digital strategy is and what are they doing to make themselves future ready. And that should become an active part of the investment equation, because if Africa is going to increase its contribution to global GDP, it needs to grow faster than the rest of the world is growing. And we're not going to be able to do that unless we're digitizing in every aspect, and especially our key corporations need to be driving that. The second point I would make is that it's important to invest in infrastructure that drives digitization. So to invest in the areas of broadband infrastructure, regulatory infrastructure, people infrastructure, all of these things that will lay the foundation for Africa to be able to digitize effectively going forward. That should be something that investors look at as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. This is Teresa Clark with Africa.com. here live at the Africa Investors Conference. We've just concluded talking with Victor Williams and Mark Chaban. Thank you so much.